Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for QHU this afternoon. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I hope that you are having a wonderful and lucky day. Today we are diving into Herstory and women's history. If you did not know, March is Women's History Month, and that is definitely very exciting as we kind of celebrate not only women that have made an impact in the world, in our nation, but also women who have made an impact in Clay County. So, check out our social medias throughout the month to see different women that we are highlighting that have done incredible things. But my name is Alyssa Jordan. I am the Community Relations Coordinator here at Quigley House. I have kind of put together a timeline and everything for you of Herstory and everything, and I'm excited to share with you today. So first of all, when we talk about Herstory, what is that? Herstory is, as the dictionary defines, it's history considered or presented from a feminist viewpoint or with special attention to the experience of women. And if you're watching this recording and everything, drop in the comments, what does Herstory mean to you? It's essentially just a fancy way to say that Herstory or history focused on women. And we know that women have made such a grand impact in how the world works today. And so it's important to celebrate and highlight important moments of Herstory that kind of help shape our nation as it is today, and as we are continuing to shape our nation and our world for the betterment of all. And so obviously March is Women's History Month. What is that? Why do we need a month to celebrate women's history? Women's History Month had its origins as a national celebration in 1981 when Congress passed this particular bill, which authorized and requested the president to proclaim this week, beginning March 7th, 1982, as Women's History Week. That then expanded into a petition by the National Women's History Project, in which Congress designated the entire month of March as Women's History Month. And starting in 1995, every president, every single year, has proclaimed March is Women's History Month, and we should celebrate that. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into Herstory, and Herstory is very, very important to what we do today at Quigley House. It was the beginning of the battered women's movement, the suffrage movement, civil rights, everything that the Herstory timeline kind of foretells or kind of goes through has made an impact in how we provide services and what we're able to do today. So let's just go through some of these important dates. So obviously we start in 1492, the beginning of colonialism and tyranny on the indigenous people of what is now called the Americans. So that's the foundation for the attack on tribal sovereignty. In the 1500s, early settlers in North America based their laws on Old English common law that permits wife beating. This was used as a form of punishment. There used to be an old saying and an old law that you could beat your wife on Sunday on the church steps, and that was perfectly okay. So this kind of set the foundation that those behaviors and those laws were perfectly okay. So that is the foundation for legal and social justification of battering. It made everybody okay with that because it's a discipline. In the 1600s to 1800s, we had the foundation for human bondage. So that was when chattel slavery is legalized and enforced. In the 1800s, we started the abolitionist movement, and that led to the suffrage movement, which was the first wave of women's and civil rights movements, and kind of sparked a fire under women and minorities to fight for their rights as humans. The foundation for segregation was passed in 1898. and that established separate but equal, which honestly kind of backtracked the whole first wave of the civil rights movements and everything like that. So it just meant that, you know, women and other minorities had to work harder to obtain those rights. So in 1919, you know, Congress passed the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. So that was a foundation for women's legal advocacy. And then here is where kind of the DV aspect and the sexual violence aspect of the battered women's movement kind of starts coming to light. In 1970, the first battered women's shelter opened in Chiswick, England by Aaron Pizzey. And then by 1971, the first rape crisis center opened in the United States by the Bay Area Women Against Rape, which is huge. Our first rape crisis center opened. And then in 1973, not following far behind, our first battered women's shelter opened in the United States. In 1976, Pennsylvania founded the first coalition against domestic violence. And if you did not know, every single state in the United States has its own coalition against domestic violence. It might be a coalition, it might be a council, it might be a collaborative, but they help to facilitate not only service provisions, but also funding, trainings, things like that, to make sure that advocates at your local centers are provided the best and most up-to-date resources, trainings, and kind of advocate for services that we do need to provide when it comes to like legislation or any sort of political like agendas or anything like that. In 1981, the Women of Color Task Force of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence received 8-month planning grant to address the unique issues of women of color. We know that women of color are far more likely to experience domestic violence, and other women of minorities are also highly likely to experience sexual violence or domestic violence. So it is an issue that affects everyone, regardless of age, race, gender, and it's important to address those things. And the unique issues that each particular group suffers or faces. In 1984, the passage of the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act through grassroots lobbying efforts earmarks federal funding for programs serving survivors. It established the need and the reasoning behind why we need to help people escape these situations. In 1994, VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, passed, and it created a significant increase in federal funding for criminal justice response, victim services, technical assistance, and community education. VAWA is a very, very important bill that helps provide funding for service centers to provide those life-saving services that survivors need. And we are still fighting to make sure that funding is increased on VAWA every single year. In the 1990s, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence established the very first national toll-free domestic violence hotline to help service providers all over the country provide resources, get the most up-to-date information, help safety plan, connect them with other centers for trainings. And that kind of sparked a national movement to make sure that everybody is getting the services that they require. And where are we now? We are continuing to expand services. We are continuing to educate communities about DV and SV to build awareness. And if you're not familiar with DV and SV, that's domestic violence and sexual violence. We are making conscious efforts to promote social change and systems advocacy among advocates. And we are growing primary prevention efforts to promote healthy relationships in communities. In the late 90s, early 2000s, a really large push for prevention programming came into play because we know as service providers, and just studying the trends of domestic violence and sexual violence, it starts with our youth. We need to work to educate young people on how to have healthy relationships, how to have healthy encounters with people who, you know, they're having relationships with, having friendships with. And it is so important to kind of break those generational cycles of abuse and educate people on how to form healthy family cycles. So primary prevention is a giant push, and we want to make sure that everybody is getting the education and the tools that they need to combat violence. So when we kind of talk about women's history, it's important to note women that are making history right now. And these were a few that I wanted to highlight today. You know, as we're talking about women's history, if you follow our social medias, we have things posted all throughout the month. But there's also some really good websites that you can check out, like history.com has a really great women's history page, and then it has different slideshows of people who are making impacts in specific categories, like leaders that are women, artists, athletes. But here are a few that I wanted to highlight today. Jennifer King is the first Black woman to hold an NFL coaching position, and she was one of the first Black women to hold an assistant coaching position as well. So, but right now she is the head coach of the Washington Commanders, formerly known as the Redskins. So that's incredible. Sarah McBride, representing Delaware, she's a Democrat that became the first trans person state senator in 2020, and she was key in helping pass a trans rights bill in Delaware in 2020 as well. So she's making a huge impact in Delaware and throughout her state. And then we have Joanne Bass, who is a sergeant, who is a chief master sergeant in the Air Force. And she is the first woman and first Asian American to hold that title in the Air Force. And she is the highest enlisted leadership, you know, ranked under the Air Force. And she has over 600,000 service members at her command. So these are women that are making big moves in their fields, and I felt it was important to highlight these particular women because it shows you how diverse and how you know, how important it is to celebrate people who are achieving incredible things and that are excelling at the work that they're doing. And I did just want to talk about a little bit, this was going to be a very short presentation today, but obviously the Herstory movement and the Battered Women's movement has helped to make Quigley House possible and help provide us with the ability to host all these incredible services and programs. And if you did not know what Quigley House was, somehow you happened upon this video, thank you so much for watching. But Quigley House is the only certified dual domestic violence and sexual assault center serving Clay County, Florida. And we help serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. We have a 24-hour crisis helpline that if you're listening to the recording and not necessarily seeing the video, our crisis helpline is 904-284-0061. That has 24-hour trained advocates available to talk, crisis plan, our crisis counsel, safety plan, provide resources, information. And then we provide a myriad of services. We have our emergency shelter for survivors, men, women, and children, and their pets. We do individual and group counseling, information and referrals. We do advocacy for adults and children and provide specialized services based on whatever they need. We have outreach services that include a child welfare program, an economic justice program, and a housing program. We do sexual assault forensic evidence collection exams, and we are the sexual assault center that does all of the exams for Clay County. We have legal services and advocacy, which includes our Injunction for Protection Project, which is a Florida bar licensed attorney that helps people file injunctions for protection. And we provide community education like trainings like these, and we go out and speak to people about different topics. We have primary prevention programming and professional trainings that we do for donors, community partners, all kinds of people. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time today to watch this video and attend this training. I would love if you had questions, or if you had kind of any insight into other women that we should kind of highlight or celebrate. Please leave in the comments or send us a direct message on any of our social medias. And thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope that you have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.